Today, we're looking at how artificial intelligence, both generative and classical machine learning, can completely reshape government service delivery. And we're going big and small, from Brisbane City Council, the largest local government in the Southern Hemisphere, to national governments with fewer resources but equally complex challenges like the Seychelles, Maldives, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, and even Madagascar. To unpack all of this, I'm joined by my partner, Curtis West. Curtis leads our data and software engineering division. He's our resident guru. Curtis has spent years designing, implementing and optimising AI and software systems for government and industry, with one goal: deliver results leaders can measure. Curtis, welcome to the show. Before we get into the applications for government, let's clear up the basics here. AI gets thrown around as a catch-all term for everything from predictive text to sci-fi robots. How do you define it, and where do machine learning and generative AI fit in?
Yeah, I mean, we could go down a very deep rabbit hole and get into the semantics around this very in depth. But I think that probably the easiest way to outline it is exactly what you've said. Sort of divide it into two categories. We have this generative AI, which is all the creation of new content, whether that's text or images or code or even chatting with a chatbot, for example. Typically, we see that as like an interaction quite naturally with a human. And then we also have machine learning, which is more of the, I guess, classical AI, which is learning from historical data to predict or classify things. So you often see that in relation to detecting, say, anomalies with fraud or forecasting service demand. That's been around for quite a long time, although it is obviously still rapidly advancing. And really, when we talk about these two applications, there's often a need for both. So machine learning is great for applications around optimization and efficiency. And Gen AI is often really well used for engagement, internal support, typically with people who are less technical or less technically focused. Obviously, the average person in a business is not necessarily concerned with the stats around fraud, for example, but they very much would be interested in understanding about the company's policies and those sorts of things. So that's where Gen AI fits in. But yeah, both Gen AI and classical AI or machine learning approach both have wide-ranging applications in almost every organization.
Right. So for a government leader who's not in the weeds on tech, so the big takeaway would be that machine learning is about learning from data to predict or decide, while Gen AI creates new content or interactions based on what it's learned.
Yeah, exactly right, exactly right. And it's fairly nice and neat to divide the two like that now, but we are finding that more and more they do overlap, but still it's a very valid way to think about it.
Yeah, great. So Curtis, AI in government isn't new, and we've seen analytics, automation, and even predictive modeling for years. So what's different now?
Yeah, so obviously there's been a bit of a step change in relation to some of these big AI models being released or big Gen AI models being released, particularly around affordability and accessibility. And that's also coupled with, I guess, the exponential growth we're seeing in cloud and compute power. So suddenly we're not running, data centers at the back of our warehouse. It's all offloaded to the cloud, and it's very easy to spin up what would have been a enormous capital expenditure quite easily, quite affordably. We're also seeing the growth of a lot of open source content. So we're seeing, API access, open source models, even all lowering the barrier for small teams. Historically, this would have been locked behind, say, a very large fraud compliance team in a big bank, for example. But now it's accessible to almost anyone. We're also seeing the rise of this agentic AI and even multi-agent orchestration. So this is starting to mean that AI can act on our behalf. ChatGPT just released their version, but there is plenty of them out there, and even the ones that you can develop yourself. Yeah, it means you can act on your behalf, not just advise us on the questions we've asked, for example. Historically, these sorts of things would have been very structured and rigid. If we're talking automation rather, whereas AI can be very sort of flexible and react to changing process flows or questions or error cases that haven't been hard coded into an automation, for example.
Yeah, right. So it's not just better tech, it's cheaper, faster, easier to deploy, no barriers to entry. which means even a small island nation like Nauru or Sri Lanka, with a team of 10 IT staff could compete with a mega council like Brisbane if they chose the right approach.
Yeah, we are seeing some of this sort of punching above your weight, if you will, in some of these smaller nations. They often focus a lot on streamlining the government services and through the use of those digital technologies. Estonia is a great example. They have, fewer than 1,000 IT staff running probably one of the most complex e-government platforms in-house, supporting just over 1 million citizens. And so even right now, we're seeing these digital technologies helping governments punch above their weight. And I think particularly in the IT sector of government, this will only get exponentially bigger. So you need fewer and fewer staff to achieve more and more. So it is really an inflection point, I think.
Yeah. So, Curtis, let's talk about this idea of AI agents. So, these autonomous or semi-autonomous digital workers, what can they actually do for local council or small national governments?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think our answer for this year will be different to what we say next year and the year after that, because it's just so quickly advancing. I think for right now, the common use cases for agents is really around that interaction with the citizen. So obviously a great example is customer service. So historically, you might have had a chatbot, for example, who could return some articles off your knowledge base. And often customers have come to expect that. But now we're seeing more and more that those chatbots are being expanded into action-taking agents, if you will. So whether it's helping with payments or helping applications, say a development application to be lodged, even right down to pulling up those articles, but helping step through the actions that are required to achieve, registration and those sorts of things. So rather than just helping citizens navigate, it's actually helping them realize the value from their rates, for example, right? So the other thing we're seeing here is a lot of applications for AI agents in infrastructure maintenance. So we're seeing, historically you've had a very large ERP used to manage all this data around when maintenance cycles are for infrastructure. But with the growth of IoT sensor data and different applications for AI to gather more data for us, so whether that's imagery or video cameras and those sorts of things to detect, say, potholes, even seeing cameras stuck on garbage trucks to detect potholes. Um, that feeding into an AI model is now able to dispatch, a team to go fix. And we could always sort of do that. I think the application here for AI is to extract that information in a very structured manner. But the next step as well is the assessment of that. So for example, like a pothole is a perfect example. Is it a small pothole? Is it a big pothole? If we overlay that with traffic data, for example, where does that then fit into priority and ultimately deliver better outcomes for the government and for the ratepayer? And ultimately, again, internally within the government as well, it allows those staff to focus on more complex and value-adding tasks, not this sort of repetitive admin or often cases what can be perceived as inconsistent decision making. We can really set those boundaries very, very neatly with the use of AI agents in that respect.
Right. So it's not replacing people; it's augmenting them and freeing them up to do higher value work.
Yeah, often is the case, 100%.
Right. So, Curtis, if the tech's there, why aren't we seeing AI in every government service already?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's a lot of factors that play into it. And there's no, I guess, one neat sentence answer that wraps that up quite tidily. However, I think if you break it down to the factors, right? So you've got procurement complexity. So government procurement is often very, very complex and quite lengthy. We have what is a very rapidly changing uh, sector in AI, and yet it's caught up in what is typically a very slow and methodical tender process. So by the time we tender and go through that process and choose whatever AI tool it may be, there's a very good chance that's already out of date, and then that sort of causes hesitancy to even start. We also see commonly across government is this concept of data silos, and it's not unique to government, but is quite common there. And that's information that's trapped across different disconnected systems. And while you can implement AI models in those systems, the issue is if it's only as good as the data it's fed. And probably the worst thing you could do is have an AI model that is either hallucinating information or misleading staff or citizens or whoever it may be using that information from the AI model. That's often worse than having nothing at all. I will put a caveat on that. Like there is 100% some great applications for very small proof of concepts, but more systemic change of AI really does require a good data foundation through there as well.
Yeah, right. I see. That's interesting. So, mate, sometimes the biggest risk, as we see, is inaction. The Brisbane City Council, they serve over 1.28 million residents, and that's bigger than the population of Mauritius, the Seychelles, and the Maldives combined. But those smaller nations, they might be more agile if they move now and with the right support. Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely so. So they're not dealing with, I guess, um, such complex environments in a lot of respects, but also just purely if you're dealing with a smaller team internally, then the simple human factors say that agile change is much more achievable.
Yeah, great, great. So, so Curtis, if you were sitting down with, let's just say, Lord Mayor Schrinner from Brisbane City Council, or any mayor or Lord Mayor from any council around the Indo-Pacific, or Minister Lay, who's the local government minister for Queensland state government, and they said, "Where do I start?" Well, what's your answer?
Yeah, I think so. The very first thing you'd want to do is understand that the factors of that organization. So each organization is unique, and so obviously we'd want to understand a bit more about that. But if we look just generally, right, like what is that low hanging fruit? So I think things like licensing and permit renewals are a great candidate for automation, whether that's AI or not. We all know frustrations boil over with council if queues are quite long and processing backlogs grow. We also see a lot of application for Gen AI in chatbots. So again, historically, we've had some quite basic chatbots that do this, but now, we're seeing much more capable chatbots to really guide the citizen or the constituent through some decision-making processes and that sort of stuff. There will definitely be applications, or expanded applications for AI in emergency response as well. So predictive ML about where to pre-place generators, for example, leading into a storm season and those sorts of things. And similarly as well, like the predictive maintenance, although that's currently happening, is expanding very, very quickly with the likes of Vapor, who can inspect water pipes automatically and those sorts of things. So all of these are like really measurable, quick to implement, and they build internal confidence, which is just absolutely so important. That internal confidence is probably the single biggest hurdle towards systemic AI applications within an organization.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about disaster preparedness, and we used to do a lot of work, as with various state and local government agencies here in Queensland, and obviously Queensland's almost a disaster capital, albeit poor northern New South Wales at the moment, but in Australia, and we do a whole lot of planning for the state government to say this is where we think you need bricks of generators, water, shelter, everything that goes around the recovery stage. In that first little while. And we were just at the data that we got was from talking to various operations managers around Australia and trying to work out, it would take days, if not weeks, to work out, where is the best location, or, for example, how are we going to get, goods if all the roads are cut, via sea, or, if air's not an option. And this could take days or weeks to model, but these days, it can take 5 seconds.
Yeah. Even if we talk just about the data collection process there, historically, you've either had to force all of these vendors to submit information in a very structured format, which often they don't want to do because, yeah, they don't want to do it, or you have to manually scrape it and put it in yourself. But that's another great application of AI that we're seeing is this data extraction. So you can give a very unstructured, say, email from a generator supplier saying we have, two 5,000 kilowatt hours available over here, or whatever it may be, if I'm a generator person, um, available, in this area. And then we can use AI to extract that in a very structured manner and put it into our database and feed that into the model about how we should prepare.
Wow, it's amazing. And then you can even, look at the consumption of fuel on these particular generators using AI if they're not already powered by light or solar. It's come a
Yeah,
long way.
it has.
So that's where leaders can see value fast then, and that momentum can then help fund bigger and longer term projects.
Yeah, 100%.
That's cool. Hey, Curtis, you've spoken about a simple model for thinking about AI in government, and that's eliminate, support, and extend. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't think this is unique to government, although it is a great application for this model. For us, when we look at any organization, I think understanding the context of that organization is very, very important. Now, obviously, government works in a bit of a unique situation in that it's simultaneously like commercial and not commercial. And historically, there's a lot of staff involved in almost any decision that's made. And so these human factors become far more important than they probably would be in other organizations. Of course, technology is still important, and we run the risk of potentially changing too much too quickly, and that's where this model comes in. So the very first thing we try to do, or try to focus on rather, is elimination. So we want to remove unnecessary manual processes. These are things that are tiring to do or error prone. That could be great candidates for very, I guess, low investment AI implementations, so automations and those sorts of things. And the reason we do that so quickly up front is to get that buy-in from the team. So, there's obviously a lot of concern around AI replacing jobs, and we're not probably at that stage yet, but there is a lot of valid concern about that. And so we need to make sure that people are across it. There's also concern around not everyone's used AI or has grown up with AI necessarily, right? So the application of teaching them how it works is very important. And that's what Eliminate can help them do, because at the end of the day, no one really likes doing their manual processes, or even worse, making mistakes doing those manual processes. So if we can eliminate that, all the better. Then we start to think about, with the team on board, we can start to extract some information about how AI could help support them. So help them make better decisions, make them faster, surface information that helps them make better decisions, or even make those decisions themselves. Um, Again, you can't really do that without having the team buy-in, because it's very, very hard to understand what support someone is to it's very hard to understand what support someone requires without, I guess, understanding the processes that they do on a day-to-day basis, and that's what Eliminate is. And then finally, we talk about extending. So that's giving humans capabilities that they probably didn't have before. That can be, very, very basic stuff, from, different ways to generate information to support their job, but also, completely new products, if you will, or service lines. So, a great example, probably in a government context, is historically you might have had a call center that's open 9 to 5. It is very possible now to have at least a basic level of support delivered by an AI agent 24/7. Then they pick up the phone instantly rather than waiting on hold. So that's a whole new, essentially, business line that's available now that just simply was not available before. And it really extends the capabilities of what humans are able to do and steer with an organization.
Yeah, wow. I really like that. So, that's a leadership lens, not just a technology lens.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you need. I think too often we get caught in, look at how cool this technology is, without appreciating the human factors and the leadership and the complexity that goes behind what is some very cool tech.
Yeah, and as we've seen, mate, it's quite often you work with leaders, to get to solve a really complex problem, but then the IT department slash the sales prevention unit get involved, and all that hard work goes down the drain.
Yeah, it's important. Like, all those factors are very important. Obviously, security is a big concern around AI, validly, but I think we said earlier that the biggest risk at this point is inaction. So we need to very, very much take a balanced approach on this, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, great point, great point. Curtis, when you look at Brisbane as an example versus, say, the Maldives or the Seychelles, what's the most surprising thing you've seen?
Yeah, so these smaller governments are able to move quite quickly, and I guess without some of the red tape involved as well. So we're seeing, out in Mauritius, which is ranked number 1 in Africa for their e-government approach, you know, investing in free internet for all the households. So this is where I guess they can sort of start to punch above their weight. Historically, I think in Australia, offering free internet would be an enormous expense just due to our geography, right? But you think about the step change in the economy from getting every single citizen involved in the digital economy, in just having information available from the internet, let alone the AI applications that then come from that. Um, in Sri Lanka, they have reports of using AI in agriculture, which is like significantly reducing subsidy processing times from weeks to hours. So everyone benefits from that. Government benefits, the farmer benefits, the end consumer benefits as well. And so these sorts of things is where it really highlights that sometimes having agility beats scale. Smaller nations can certainly leapfrog, I guess, legacy heavy large governments in a lot of respect. And yeah, I think that's an important consideration for us to think about in how we structure our governments over here is how do we bring some of that agility into what is naturally a very large and heavy government structure as it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Lots of red tape, at least in Australia as an example, and for a number of reasons, be they valid or not. But what you've just highlighted there really shows that innovation doesn't just happen in big capitals and in the Western world, but sometimes it's small governments that are leapfrogging everyone else because they can pivot really quickly.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
So, Curtis, final question for a leader, a government leader listening today, be it local, state, federal government. What's the first step that they can take tomorrow to start getting AI wins?
Yeah, I think our approach again, focus on that eliminate, right? So I love the term. We want to press the bruises. So find where the bruises are, find which ones hurt the most to press, and often that is where you'll find a great opportunity to eliminate some high volume but sort of low complexity process that is error prone, whether that's permitting or citizen FAQs and those sorts of things. And then try and run a pilot on that and make it a pilot that is measurable and communicate its results very widely internally and potentially even publicly, right? And what that enables us to do is build that confidence incrementally and then start to scale out to a broader strategic program. Because if we jump straight to a strategic program, we run the risk of spooking the existing staff base that we have. Am I going to lose my job to AI? Those sorts of questions, as well as potentially going down the wrong path. There's obviously very different models about how to implement AI within an organization. Like, is it a central team or is it a distributed team or is there a business partner in each business unit, that sort of stuff. And that's what those pilots can help tease out what is the best approach for your organization. And exactly the same thing applies to government, right? So I suppose, yeah, my message to leaders is, at this point, doing nothing is riskier than starting small. But I think, yeah, the applications of AI aren't going away. And so we need to just really start to think about how we're going to implement this sooner rather than later.
Curtis, that's great advice. That's it for this episode of Vaxa Bureau Intelligence Optimised. We've seen today that AI isn't a someday tool, whether you're leading a council of over 1 million or a nation of a few 100,000. The opportunities and the stakes are the same.